Why do growing businesses love working in Slack? Let's ask Christy at Ari Bikes.
Running things in Slack saves me so much time.
AI summaries save 97 minutes per week. What say you, Rox from Gosney?
Slack helps us build community, it helps us build connection.
Your partners, vendors and customers all in one place. Take us on home, Ashley from Caraway.
If we didn't have Slack tomorrow, I would explode.
Well, let's not let that happen. Visit slack.com/podcast to get 50% off Slack Business Plus.
The idea really is to create a distribution platform that enables publishers to share content with each other in a way that is measurable. So unlike kind of conventional syndication where publishers are republishing stories from one another onto each other's platforms, but can we create a technology that would enable publishers to share stories with each other in a way that was measurable in their own analytics so they could see how their content was performing across third-party distribution? And can we do it in a way that was also monetizable?
This is Small Press, Big Ideas, a podcast about the business of local news in the United States. I'm your host, Paul Gewertz. Small Press, Big Ideas is about the opportunities and challenges that local news publishers are facing for their businesses. I'll sit down and talk with journalists, entrepreneurs, nonprofit leaders, and more in the local news industry to find out what's working, what isn't, and how the local news ecosystem can innovate and flourish in the 21st century. All right. Today on the podcast, I'm joined by David Gehring. He is the, I believe, CEO and co-founder of Distributed Media Lab, which basically helps sharing content efficiently across independent publishers operating on multiple platforms. And we can dig in all that in a little bit. So, Dave, good to see you again, and thanks for coming on the show, man. I appreciate it.
Thanks. Yeah, good to be here.
Yeah. So you've got a bit of a different backstory than a lot of the folks on here. Typically, it's one of two ways. People have been in like journalism or local journalism like since they were a teenager, or they come more from somewhere completely outside the box or whatever. And you've kind of got a bit of a story of both. So I'd like to just start with that. If you can just tell people about yourself, your kind of background and your story and kind of what's led to Distributed Media Lab and everything.
Yeah, I mean, so Distributed Media Lab, we're about 8.5, almost 9 years old at this point. You know, I started Distributed Media Lab with Sam Parnell, my co-founder, who had previously been the chief technology officer at Bleacher Report, and then stayed on at Time Warner when they sold it, which feels like a lifetime ago at this point. And before that, I had a startup called Relay Media that was basically a technology company that was helping local publishers primarily and some other publishers convert their websites to the what's referred to as the AMP HTML format or the AMP protocol, and which I had helped create that open source software project back in 2015 while I was at The Guardian, and in a role that gave me an opportunity to work very closely with Google on a variety of strategic initiatives where I had worked previously as an executive at Google, primarily in the partnerships organization, and then before that in YouTube, doing news partnerships globally. And before that, it was really more of an enterprise software background where I spent what feels like too many years of my life in the enterprise space before getting back to the internet and getting more focused on consumer applications and consumer interfaces. And really the transition from enterprise software to the internet was really born out of a desire to try and have an impact on media in general, but news in particular, news in general, and then local news really specifically. I think personally, I was just concerned with the erosion of an economic framework that supports doing journalism at scale. And as the digital economy was growing very, very rapidly and was growing at the expense of the traditional media economy, particularly in the news industry, I was just worried about the implications of that on society and on democracy. And so I thought, if I've got 20 or 30 years left of my career to do something that has an impact, I want to dedicate it to establishing a new viable economic framework that supports journalism on the web. And so got started with that mission by starting the news partnerships focus at YouTube, and then moved into the strategy or team at Google before moving on to The Guardian, which was the first and only publisher I've ever worked for. but was only there officially for a few months before becoming an advisor to his coalition of European media companies that we had formed, and then went from there. So, after we sold the last company to Google in 2017, I started Distributed Media Lab, which is a technology company based here in Silicon Valley that is a content distribution platform for publishers and brands. And the idea really is to create a distribution platform that enables publishers to share content with each other in a way that is measurable. So unlike kind of conventional syndication where publishers are republishing stories from one another onto each other's platforms, but can we create a technology that would enable publishers to share stories with each other in a way that was measurable in their own analytics so they could see how their content was performing across third-party distribution? And could we do it in a way that was also monetizable? Because I thought the fundamental problem that I wanted to solve was an economic one, which was how do we grow revenue for publishers in general and local publishers in particular? And so could we come up with technologies that enabled content sharing in a way that was also monetizable through sponsorship and other revenue streams? And so for the first few years, Sam and I think it's fair to say, did a lot of experimenting, working with large publishers and small publishers on a variety of things and building a lot of technology along the way. And then in 2020, started a conversation with KQED here in San Francisco. And the idea that kind of came out of a lunch conversation with their COO was that what if we built a California news wire where publishers could share their stories of statewide relevance. So local publishers from time to time publishing a story that is relevant beyond their market or their town, put that story into this wire for broader statewide distribution. And then do it in a way that we could then go and have it sponsored by, one of KQED's sponsors. And then that sponsorship revenue could be split amongst the local publishers that have the wire on their site. And so we, in 2024, launched what I call the California News Hub, which is now a distribution network that has over 30-something local news publishers across the state of California with this wire embedded on their site. The stories are actually curated from a couple dozen, at least, local news organizations, but also other news organizations like Cal Matters, and The Guardian gets stories in there from time to time when it's about California, KFF Health News, others as well. KQED curates those stories in their newsroom, and so they pick the stories that go into the feed. And then as they pick those stories flow out to wherever the distribution is on over 30-something local news websites. And then in 2025, we thought, okay, we've got enough of a reach, like we're doing over 1.5 million monthly impressions of this wire of content out to 30-something publishers. So that's kind of a baseline for approaching advertisers that are looking for a statewide audience. And so KQED reached out to the Monterey Bay Aquarium, and for a few months, we were actually running their sponsorship for free, testing this to see like how is it performing, and how does that performance compare to the budget that they spend on other advertising channels. And then in June, they agreed to go ahead and sponsor this thing, so it became a paid sponsorship, and we started sharing that revenue with the local publishers across California. And then they decided to keep it going for the rest of the year. And then a few weeks ago, they let us know that they wanted to keep it going for all of 2026.
Awesome.
So now we've got this is a new revenue stream that is being shared with local publishers and is sold by a local publisher, which was really important to me as a guy coming out of the tech, more of the tech background. I really, really, really did not want to start another technology company that disintermediated publishers from their customers, the advertisers, or from their audiences. And so I didn't want to be, the tech company that came in and said, hey, put this on your site. We'll decide what goes there and we'll just send you some money. And because we're talking to the advertisers, we're talking to the revenue side. I wanted to empower local publishers to actually sell larger campaigns to advertisers in their markets by giving them a larger distribution opportunity than their own native their own native platforms. And so now in 2026, we've got more of the participating publishers lined up to start selling sponsorships to monetize that network, which then helps us grow the network as the revenue side grows. That enables me to reach out to more local publishers across the state and add them to the network. And it's been, 2.5, maybe 3 years in the making, but it feels like we're finally at the starting line.
Don't you hate that feeling?
You have to compress time to feel positive about everything.
Yeah.
But I feel really good about it. And everyone's excited about it. The local publishers are excited about it. KQED has been a, kind of the most amazing partner I could ever imagine across the team at KQED here in San Francisco. And it's really established a model that we hope will be something that we can bring to other states in 2026. Kicking things off was really supported by the Google News Initiative. They really funded a lot of the beginning steps to building the foundation of this thing, and so we're hoping to launch this in several more states in 2026.
That's awesome. I love this model because it does a few things that it grows it to that scale. Like I had Ryan Heafy on here a while ago from 6 a.m. City. I'm not sure if you're familiar with them.
Yeah.
They're a very fast-moving, fast-growing newsletter first organization in like the Southeast, in the South. And his kind of argument when he came on the podcast is like, it's one thing being a local outlet. It's another if you have a hub in 4 neighboring cities and you get that scale, and then you can go to, like you said, the aquarium or, the local hospital group or whatever the case may be that wants a statewide thing. Whereas he's doing it as an internal, like, organizational thing. This is like a collaborative model that kind of benefits everybody.
Yeah, and it was really, there was a lot of principles that we were trying to adhere to as we figured out what we wanted to do and how and why. And one of those principles was, how can we grow scale in a way that doesn't require local publishers to change their editorial focus or to be merged or acquired by a larger corporate organization, bringing efficiencies of operation by kind of combining back office systems? Like, how can we maintain local independent ownership while also at the same time broadening the market opportunity for larger revenue streams? And can we fill in like editorial gaps with statewide coverage that maybe historically would have been provided by the AP or other wire services, that now the economics of that are really challenging? And so can we fill in those gaps without asking local journalists to do anything other than local journalism, local power to account and doing their role? And so that was really a mix of very, very difficult principles that we were trying to adhere to as we were trying to figure out what the model should be.
So when you're talking about, did you say it's 30 local partners or publishers in California that are on board? How do you look at, because, it's one thing for regionals and smaller newspapers to have this bring it into their fold, but the real struggle and pain in the country is like these news deserts, places with lower populations, everything like that. So I guess my question is kind of, what's the scale of these partners? How do you look at who you can bring on? Like, say there's a new little startup with 1 or 2 people somewhere and they're doing good work, but like, how do they join the fold? How do you look? Does that make sense? That question? Like,
yeah, I mean, I think that news deserts are characterized in a variety of different ways. So like one, some news deserts are small just because the market is so small, so that there's just not really much of a local economy to support the operation of a local media organization. Now, a lot of those places historically, at least that I'm familiar with here in California, were covered by small, traditional local news organizations that have since been kind of gobbled up by hedge fund-owned corporations and then kind of eviscerated of any kind of local reporting. And so they really just became, properties to carry content from other sources for the sake of trying to put advertising on there that is from outside of the market. Some markets are, so in a lot of those news deserts, I think that it makes sense to launch very small local nonprofit news organizations where the primary income for those organizations is going to be philanthropic or donor-based. And then we add an incremental revenue stream by just adding our content feed to the site. And we also, I think, support those local news organizations by giving them something to give their readers that they're not able to cover on their own. So like in the case of California News Hub, it's statewide stories, so stories of statewide relevance. But we've also done a lot of stuff with sports. So like local news organization doesn't have the ability to cover the local professional sports teams that are most important to their community. So we've done projects with the local media consortium over the years and others where we just provide, coverage for all of the local professional teams that anybody living in that region might be interested in. So give them a sports section for free, kind of a thing. And then they can go and, sell the local car dealer to sponsor the sports section on their site. But then other parts of California, it's and it's probably true across the country, there's a whole lot of what can be extremely unrelated reasons for the existence of a news desert or for a news desert to be a desert. And so sometimes that's economic, sometimes that's political. And so I think that I appreciate a lot of the discussion in our industry around rebuilding trust, but I also appreciate all the discussions in our industry around rebuilding sustainable revenue models. And what are those in this new economy? And so we spend a lot of time trying to figure out how to grow revenue for local news organizations in a way that doesn't ask them to do anything other than local journalism. It varies tremendously from market to market. I think some markets have a lot more of an opportunity for a nonprofit model. Other markets have a lot more of an opportunity for a for-profit model. I think in all cases we're talking about a small business model. So there's a lot of really good conversations I think happening right now, and a lot of good work being done to build the mechanisms for financing the development of this industry appropriately. So I'm excited about that stuff.
Yeah, that's great. It's funny. I'm in Western Colorado, and I have people from all over the country on this podcast. But lately, I've been realizing it's disproportionately my guests are from California or Texas. Because there's interesting things happening, but they're both basically their own countries, geographic size and population size and everything. So they're kind of both good training grounds for things like this, to roll out to the next of the country, new models, new frameworks
and it's hard,
like
though,
this.
Because with California's economy being as big as it is, it gives us a lot more to play with than in a smaller state. And then sometimes that's a trap. Sometimes you kind of figure out something that works in California that's not going to work in other states that are smaller and just very differently structured economically.
Yeah, the go-to in my brain, because I'm here in Colorado, my wife's family, we have a lot of family in Montana, all through the Mountain West here. And I talk to a lot of people on the coast and just I'm like, go drive through Wyoming. Like when I hear some of these models and stuff, I'm like, it's not going to work. There's 300,000 people in the size of the 4 other states. That's just an example that comes to mind. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So when you think, you kind of talked about growing this to other states and everything, how does that look to you? It's funny. I just had somebody on the show yesterday who you probably know, Kristen Go from Cal Matters, I think.
Oh yeah.
I just had her on yesterday, and they have another project, an AI kind of tool for covering government. And I kind of had the same question for her. When you look at growing it to other states, and you said, other states are different. California is a special economically, size-wise, everything.
Yeah.
I don't know if you put much thought into this since you're just at the starting line, like you said, but how would you go about doing that? Would you just move geographically out from California? Would you go to similar to a New York or a Texas or something? Could it be a national thing where it doesn't matter what state, if it's geographically, if you're in Idaho, Washington, Oregon, they can all work together? How do you think about that?
I think that, what we're really doing is just building a content distribution platform for publishers and brands, which gives us the opportunity to segment that network in many different ways. And so here in California, we have the California News Hub. We're now also working in New Jersey with the Center for Cooperative Media around a New Jersey News Hub. How that works, how that's monetized might be different than how it is here in California. Other states, I think of the Northeast in particular. So Maine is an interesting state with a lot of publishers and an interesting partner in the National Trust for Local News and what they've been able to do in that state. But for the most part, we're talking about a lot of small states with not a lot of publishers across each individual state. And so that would be more of a regional approach. So then if we built distribution for the Northeast, it'd be more of we've got distribution across the Northeast, which is 4 or 5 states. And then we are looking for sponsors that are looking for a regional audience across the region rather than in one particular state. Or also, we're working now with Marketplace from American Public Media. And so in that case, we're just getting started with the effort to build national distribution for Marketplace digital content so that the national sales team at American Public Media has a national network to sell a sponsorship across. And then that revenue can be shared with local publishers. Right now, we're only talking to the public media stations that are Marketplace customers currently, but planning to expand that broadly so that we have a national distribution network that can be monetized by national sales efforts, centralized by American Public Media, benefiting local media companies with really, really, really premium content and also a revenue share for putting it on their site.
Right.
So the technology allows us to do like a national network or a state network or a regional network, however we want to segment it. That's not hard. And so really how we choose to segment the, reach across the country is more a function of understanding what the regional opportunities are, who the regional players are. In Colorado, there's a really, really strong collaborative journalism project in the collab with Laura Frank.
Mm-hmm.
In North Carolina, they've got a really strong collaborative journalism project with Shannon Bowen in NC Local. And so in different parts of the country, there's really strong collaborative efforts. Also in the public media space, which I think is increasingly, public media is local media, is public media is local media. Like I don't see any distinction anymore now, and particularly in light of recent congressional rescission for their funding. They have really strong editorial collaborations here in California, in Texas, and a few other places that over the last few years have been funded by CPB funding to form editorial collaborations that have really had a few years to take root. And then what we do often is kind of come in after the, a group of local publishers have really established editorial collaborative operations. Then we come in and say, okay, now let's also collaborate commercially and collaborate in a way that isn't undermining or removing any ounce of independent ownership or governance or control, but just collaborate commercially on top of the collaboration that you're already doing editorially.
I hadn't thought of this before, and I'm not super well versed in like the legal structures here, but like for the 30 publishers you have there, is there a difference between them being a for-profit and a non-profit in terms of what they can take off the table or what they can share? Once again, I'm not certain how the structures work and everything.
Yeah. I mean, I think in terms of the revenue opportunity, there's really no difference between nonprofit and for-profit.
Okay.
I think that both nonprofits and for-profits need to make revenue. Nonprofits have a couple extra ways to earn revenue. But then they also have a few extra kind of burdens organizationally or governance-wise that they need to maintain. And so I think that, we work with a lot of both nonprofit and for-profit news organizations. And so like, for instance, in Santa Barbara, NewsHawk is an example of a really strong for-profit local news organization. Here in the Bay Area, Embarcadero Media, which is Palo Alto Weekly, which is where I live, and several others in the Bay Area, they recently transitioned from a for-profit model to a nonprofit model, like in the last year or two. And the reason for that was really because there's a lot of wealthy people that would love to contribute philanthropically to that organization here in the Bay Area. And so, I think the CEO there was like, can't leave that on the table. And got to make it easy, give them a tax write-off. And so they made a lot of sense. Other places maybe don't have an audience that is composed of as many wealthy people as we've got here in the Bay Area. And so it maybe isn't as ripe of a market for a nonprofit model. But in terms of advertising revenue, there's really no difference. There's no difference between public media, nonprofit, private, digital native, local news startups. They're all the same to us.
I had that dream again. My small business needs to hire, but I don't use LinkedIn, and I hire wrong. So then I'm doing IT, and when I go to plug the servers in, they become sentient, and they won't let us access our network unless we forward their chain emails and memes to more and more and more people, and then I wake up.
Don't let hiring nightmares ruin your dreams. LinkedIn Jobs' new AI assistant finds and invites best fit candidates to apply, so you can discover talent you may have missed. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/quality. Start hiring today with LinkedIn.
great. It's funny. I kind of had an image in my head of everything coming full circle. A lot of the funds for local media got siphoned off by a lot of these tech companies. Now all these people are really wealthy, and they're kind of maybe giving some back in the local space like that. You know what I mean?
Well, I think one of the most kind of like endearing examples of that in our industry over the last 10 or 15 years has been Craig Newmark. He made a lot of
Is that Craigslist? Is that the Craigslist guy? Yeah, that's what I thought. Yeah.
And Craig has been just a champion in supporting news media in general, local media in a lot of ways over the years. I think now he's really focused on cybersecurity issues and veterans issues. But man, he is kind of like probably the best example of trying to pay it forward.
That's great. Yeah. I've always been, everything I've ever heard with him has been really, I've heard him on like podcasts and stuff and some interviews with him. He seems like a really good guy. Since we're on that kind of track, the Bay Area, some of the tech stuff, I think you're the only person I've had on the show who's been in the belly of the beast. You worked at Google, and Google and Meta in particular are frequently kind of the villain or framed as the villain on this show.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. The thing I like about you is you really kind of embody the ethos of like that early Google, like what was it? Don't be evil or whatever. And like the open internet and all that stuff.
Oh yeah. When I joined Google, I was just incredibly inspired by the mission to organize the world's information and make it universally accessible. And don't be evil. I mean, it was just and the mission animated the entire corporate culture. I mean, it was really kind of palpable, in the company.
Yeah. I guess what I was kind of getting at is like, so you were internal there. A lot of people I have here are lifers in, local media or journalism and everything, and they probably have their own opinions on Google. I'm curious if you have any takeaways from working internally of how maybe, I think you're pretty somewhat high ranking at Google, how people actually look at, I don't know if you want to call it the harm they've caused or the kind of the, what's happened to the local media ecosystem over the years. Like what's kind of the mood and the thinking there? Because I've never had somebody from the inside to kind of speak on it.
Yeah. I mean, I think that, in a lot of ways, Google, when I worked there, I felt more at home working at Google than probably anything else I've done in my professional life. And it was largely because, the mission was palpable and the people that I got to work with were extraordinary. I think I look at the evolution of the web economy over the last 25 years as probably more as something that Google was kind of along for the ride on rather than actually directing it with any specific intentional kind of direction.
I believe that for sure. Yeah.
Because the web was just growing every second of every day. And when I was at Google, it would reorg every 6 months, and maybe it still does. I left in 2014, so it's been a while. But it would reorg like every 6 months. And the joke was, if you don't like your current job, just wait around because you might like the next one. And it's just around the corner. But the reason for the reorg frequency was that the web economy was just growing that fast. And Google was really tasked with maintaining an organizational alignment best suited to capitalize on this rapidly changing market. And so as the market changed, in order to stay aligned with the goal of capitalizing on that changing market, the organization had to change. And so I think that made for the mission being relatively immutable. That mission became an anchor. And so I think when I worked at Google, the things that were extraordinary to me was the good intentions of so many of my colleagues. Like I've said, there's so many people that I worked with, and some of which are still there, who were just deeply personally committed to trying to figure out how to carve out a corner of the digital economy that disproportionately benefited news production and journalism in particular. And so that was really my personal mission when I went to Google. Was really, I wanted to figure out how to use my career to create a more viable economic framework to support quality original journalism on the web. And I thought it'd be a great place to start with that mission at Google, because Google was effectively managing the digital economy for the world. Yeah. And I found a lot of like-minded colleagues internally, all dedicated to that same mission. Maybe not using necessarily the same words that I did, but really committed to the same goal. Now that is kind of like, when you're on a ship and you're heading in a particular direction. Now there's the captain of the ship who's deciding when to tack and how to get to that point on the horizon, and it requires a whole lot of tacking left, tacking right, kind of going this way and that way to try and get to where you're going without losing sight of that goal. So there's a lot of zigzagging that Google has done and has had to do to try and pursue its corporate objectives. I don't think I can say that I ever thought those corporate objectives were nefarious or intentionally focused on trying to harm the news industry. It was really just who's going to capitalize the greatest on this emerging digital economy, and how do we just try and not cause as much damage to all of the other boats in the race at the same time. So I don't know. I have an incredible respect for so many people that I worked for and worked with at Google. And, but at the same time, it's really at the end of the day, because the web was getting bigger every second of every day, being able to navigate it became more important every second of every day. And Google won that navigation game. So how do you find stuff on the web? I mean, Google won that. And so because Google's core technology was so much better than any other kind of method for navigating the web, it would have been literally impossible for Google to not achieve the dominance that it did. I mean, I used to joke that the C-level of the company could be laid off and replaced by people who wanted to do the opposite, and Google would still grow 20% quarter over quarter for the next 5 years.
Yeah,
because it's just riding the tide of this market that was just growing. So I don't know. I always bristle a little bit. I bristle at criticism of Google that I think is abstract. Sometimes sometimes it's easy to criticize Google abstractly. It's more difficult to come up with valid criticisms that are specific. But when I do encounter specific criticisms, then I get an opportunity to like, oh yeah, okay, there's some truth to that.
Right.
And I think that when there's truth to the criticism, it's easy to attribute that truthful criticism to nefarious intentions. And that's almost always unwarranted. And so it's more often the case that when bad things happen, it's not always necessarily because of some evil intention. And so I always bristle at when people start by kind of positing evil intentions on specific criticisms. But if there are, when I worked at The Guardian, I would have a lot of conversations with folks in the newsroom about things that they thought were critical of Google. And then I would spend a lot of time talking to some colleagues. I was doing partnerships, so I was not, a journalist. But I spent some time talking to the journalists about the reality from my experience working inside the building is not exactly the way you want to portray it. And so let's talk it through. Now, there's other things that you could probably criticize Google for validly, but maybe this angle isn't quite, the angle that you think it is. So, but I don't know. I mean, it's just, we're all humans. I think that we're all trying to survive. We're all competing, and so sometimes that competition and that need to survive, sometimes, it makes us crystal clear in understanding what's going on around us, and sometimes it makes us maybe misunderstand a circumstance here or there.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Things, and this goes for everything, for big business, for politicians, even everything. It's rarely an evil intent, and maybe like you said, there's specifics or whatever. And to be fair to the narrative in news media. And, a lot of times they want to say Google's this big greedy corporation or whatever.
Yeah.
When you were saying riding that kind of tide, a lot of media companies really missed that over the last 2 decades, where they could have been zigging and zagging. And instead of spending all their time, making a PDF of their print edition on their home screen, looking at other business models that were popping up and figuring out how to, grab a piece of that wave along the way as well.
Yeah, I mean, I'm also really hesitant to ever criticize the way the news media operators responded to this emerging web economy, just because I think that my familiarity with the technologies that are used to try and build and grow and manage a media business on the web, those technologies were limited and are limited. And so I think,
fair point,
a lot of the times people do what they are able to with the tools that are available to them at the time. And so I think that's why, like for me with Distributed Media Lab, our mission is to build technologies that enable new revenue models for these publishers to operate more economically on the web, because a lot of those technologies don't yet exist. So one of the things that I was involved in, when I left Google and was at The Guardian, was we formed a coalition of very influential media companies that were like all of the premier journalism organizations of Western Europe, and engaged with Google on a variety of strategic initiatives. And one of the initiatives that I was really interested in, in trying to pursue was to create an open source software project to create a global standard for content syndication. And, I had been involved in a lot of conversations internally at Google when I was there around the need for kind of an open standard for syndication. I think RSS is a really powerful kind of protocol, but it requires humans to interact with each other to establish what the business relationship is and establish what is being transmitted from one publisher to the other publisher. And so by virtue of requiring humans to actually work it out, I thought it was an inherently unscalable thing. And there was no open standard technology for syndication on the web. And the absence of that, I thought, was incredibly limiting to what publishers could do. So like if publishers had more technologies to do more interesting things, would they be able to come up with better ways to zig and zag as they head towards that goal? And so I thought, well, let's create an open source standard, open source software project to create that new technology. Fortunately, the folks at Google thought it was a good idea now in the context of these coalition of European publishers asking for this in that strategic negotiation. And so out of it was born what's now referred to as the AMP project. There was some really amazing. Richard Gingras at Google is always someone I'm indebted to professionally and personally, who was VP of news at the time, and also another VP of engineering called Dave Besbris, another guy that I'm indebted to. These guys kind of took this project and ran with it in the most beautiful possible ways. And for us on the publisher side of the table, we got our best talent involved in the open source software project. And out of which came AMP HTML, which has an interesting and kind of convoluted, kind of history over the last several years since its launch. But at the end of the day, it's a syndication specification for the open web. And so, we built something new that didn't exist before that now is like a significant percentage of all the web pages on the web are actually AMP HTML pages, and they syndicate. So it enables publishers to publish a page of content that has their ads, their analytics, their paywalls on that page and have it be renderable on any third-party domain in a way where the originating publisher is still in control of that page.
That's really cool.
That enables all kinds of new business models that are more kind of functional to the architecture of the web, which, 35 years ago or whenever, when Sir Tim Berners-Lee launched the web, he built a thing that was designed to propagate information across the nodes. It was never intended to actually aggregate audience to individual domains.
Right.
And so for 25 years, media companies have been operating with a media business model that requires audience aggregation to individual domains in a medium that was literally designed not to do that. And they're wondering, why is this getting harder every day? We need an SEO expert. No, we need an SEO expert team. No, we need an SEO expert team and outside consulting, because it's just getting harder and harder every day, because literally the web was designed to distribute information. It was not designed to aggregate audience to individual domains.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And the web gets bigger every single second of every day. So trying to get people to come to an individual domain is like you're on a hamster wheel that's spinning faster and faster and faster with diminishing return.
Yeah.
And it's never going to get easier because the web just gets bigger every day. And so I thought with that, I was like, okay, we need to figure out how to create technologies that would enable publishers to build their own, what I would refer to as like owned and operated syndication networks. So we have a different audience strategy than aggregation through search and social.
So when the AMP protocol When did that, when was it developed? When did it become like a live thing in the world? You might have said it in there. I might have missed it.
Yeah, we started talking about it at the end of 2014,
Okay.
about the same time as Facebook was introducing instant articles to the world. And so instant articles was like, Apple News, where publish to this protocol and we'll render this page natively within our own platform. And I thought, I don't think that's a good idea. I think that does seem to give Facebook a lot more control than I thought was economically counterproductive. And so I thought, so about the same time as they were talking about instant articles, it was like October, November of 2014. We were, having meetings primarily in London, sometimes in Berlin or other cities around Europe, with the publishers involved in the coalition around what would be the requirements of a similar thing, but for the open web. So then in early 2015, with Google's leadership, with Dave Besbris and Richard Gingras, we launched the open source software project. And then it was pretty quickly that, there was some aspects of AMP HTML that were built, but you can never build these things fast enough. So the early criticism was, this ad unit doesn't work, that ad unit doesn't work, this analytics tag doesn't work, that analytics tag doesn't work. But over time, all of those companies, and really, again, to Google's credit, and to Dave Besbris, he had a very, very strong commitment to this being a collaborative engineering effort. And so he reached out to LinkedIn and Twitter, like in the early days. They became early adopters of the AMP, protocol on their sites. And largely because of, him driving those relationships, and more and more competing ad tech companies started building support for the AMP HTML so that their ad tags would work on this new kind of markup for a page. So I watched, Google and others working across competitive lines to just build something that was a benefit to the industry. And it was inspiring. And, I think still to this day, I wish we could do more. I think we need the open source software world to more now than we ever have before, which is incredible to say, because open source over the course of web technology's history has been foundational, and it's just more important now than it's ever been, as we start to move from the web advertising economy to an AI economy, which is very different economics, very different unit economics. And so as we move into this new digital economy, we really need to be taking a lot of the lessons that we learned from the last 20 years and trying to implement them in a way that avoids some of the mistakes that we may have made.
That's great. From the sounds of this AMP protocol, it almost sounds to me like, in terms of business models and everything, almost like kind of like AI is now, or the early internet, where I almost can't quite imagine what it could look like if it was all, how things, dynamics would change and monetizations would change and everything. I guess one last kind of question I would have is, and I don't know if you have the answer to it, is in this, inflating balloon that is the internet all the time, how do you get the forest fire of traction for this to take off? With everything that's so entrenched and kind of grown this way from that early. Does that question make sense?
I think like if you are like, I think that, we work with a lot of news organizations that have domains that have been around for a long time. And we see the difference in engagement on those long-standing domains versus a domain that's launched now. Like, I think to launch a domain today, I don't know why anyone does that. I don't know why you'd launch a website today. To leverage or harness a domain that was launched, 10 or 15 years ago, or 20 or 25 years ago, there's a lot of reason to do that. I think one of the things that I'm really excited about in terms of the moment when it comes to public media's circumstances relative to local nonprofit news organizations and local for-profit digital native local news organizations is that the audience strategies have to change. Like, you cannot rely on, from a digital perspective, you cannot rely on search and social for your audience. And one of the things that I'm extremely excited about when it comes to local is that local media organizations, more than anything else, have multiple ways of establishing their brand relationship with their local community.
Mm-hmm.
And way more ways of establishing that brand relationship with the local community than do big brand publishers that don't have a local community by definition. And so when I think about like public media, I think public media right now could play such an incredibly powerful leadership role in growing engagement across local coalitions or local collaborations, because they have long established local brands, but then they also have radio audiences and TV audiences to send to their digital properties. So they have these other channels of audience development for their digital engagement that could be harnessed in ways that grows their digital engagement, which is a place to grow revenue more so than broadcast and radio. And then also to, like, one of the things that I've been so excited about in seeing KQED's kind of leadership within our California News Hub is that it has the position in the market like a trusted kind of a trusted publisher in the market, so that the nonprofits and the for-profit digital, publishers trust them, and are willing to work with them. And that's a beautiful thing about public media. And so the trusted nature of public media, the multi-channel audience of public media, gives it kind of like the building blocks or the ingredients for playing a very powerful leadership role in this very transitionary moment. And I'm excited to see which of the public media stations are going to really play that role.
That's great. Dave, I feel like I keep asking you questions, but I have another meeting come up. I've gone over time. I appreciate you coming on here, man. You had a more thoughtful and well thought out response to every question than I could have imagined. I feel like I might have to have you on again and dig into some more stuff. But where can people find you? What do you want me to link to or promote in the show? Distributed Media Lab, yourself, and anything like that? Yeah, I mean,
distributedmedialab.com is our website. Really, LinkedIn is where we probably do most of our communicating with the market about things that have, progress that we're making, relationships that we're establishing, that sort of thing. So yeah, have people just reach out on LinkedIn.
Okay, cool. I'll link to all that stuff. And all right, man. Yeah, thanks again. Thanks for coming on. Hope you have a good day. And I feel like we should do it again sometime in the future. I'd love that at least. Yeah,
we'd love to. Anytime.
Cool. All right. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you for listening to Small Press Big Ideas. You can subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to help the show, the best thing you can do is to tell a friend or colleague and just take a few minutes to leave a rating and a review on whatever platform you're listening to right now. It only takes a minute out of your day, but it really does help the podcast grow and reach more ears. Check back for new episodes every Monday.